Hi class, just want to quickly go through module 8 on inheritance. So in this module, you'll be recognizing, constructing arrays as sequential sets of variables of the same type. You've done a little bit of this already. You're developing a menu driver application for the stepping stone program for the final project. The two assignments will be first to complete the zyBooks activity, including the reading and practice exercises. However, the zyBook activities and reading this module this week will not be graded. It will not be graded. However, the best way to learn how to program is to practice. Read first and do as many practice exercises as possible. So even though it's not graded, I highly recommend that you still go through the reading and do all of the practice exercises and challenge exercises, because again, the best way to learn how to program is to practice, is to actually get your hands dirty and program. So the second thing you'll be doing is completing the Stepping Stone Lab 6 assignment. So this will be the driver recipe box. You'll be working on the menu driver for the final project, along with some other methods for the recipe box class. And you'll be testing those methods out. And for the zyBook reading on chapter 11 on inheritance, you'll be going over derived classes. So this is based on the idea that you can have a base class, or otherwise known as a superclass, and then you can have subclasses, which are derived classes of this base class. So an example would be a person. You can have a class called a person, which has attributes, generic variables and methods of a person, and then you can have a derived class, which would be a child class, which will be derived from the person class. So it will inherit all of the properties of a person, as well as have specific variables and methods for a child. So you'll be learning about these super and subclasses. You also go over access by members of derived classes. So you'll be going over previously working with private and public variables and methods. You'll be learning about what are called protected variable methods. You'll be going over overriding member methods. So this is the idea that you can have methods that are the same name as methods in the base or superclass, and they'll be implemented differently in the subclasses. So you'll override the base class methods. You'll be going over the object class. So this is a generic class. This is sort of the base class of all objects, all other classes that you'll create or that exist in Java. And they'll have very generic methods such as toString and equals. So you can define these or override these generic object methods in your specific object classes. And then you'll be going over polymorphism, which is optional, but still polymorphism is a very important concept of Java, of object-oriented programming. And I highly recommend that you read through this and try to understand what it is, and the difference between compile time polymorphism and runtime polymorphism. And you've actually been working with compile time polymorphism when you overload your constructors. So at compile time, it determines which constructor to use based on the number of arguments used when you actually create an instance of the object. So this is the idea of compile time polymorphism. So then you'll also be working with array list of these generic objects, and the things you can do by using this generic super class called an object, which is again the base class of all other objects that are within all Java libraries and all the classes you create. This is an array list of generic objects. So you'll be working with this and seeing what you can do with an array list of generic objects. Then you'll go over ISA versus HASA relationships, which is an important concept to understand. An example of this is when you have, again, the generic person object, generic person class. Then maybe you have a mother class, which is a person. And maybe you have a child class. And confusion happens when you might think that a child class might be a subclass of the mother class, because child is under a mother in a sense. But you don't want to be confused, because the child class is actually has a relationship with the mother class, right? A mother will have a child, so that's a relationship, opposed to the person and a mother, which a mother is a person, and the child class will be is a person as well. So the mother and child are on the same level. However, the mother class has a child. The mother class will have instance variables which will use the child class, right? The child object. So this is the difference between is a versus has a relationship. And then you'll go over an example with employees and overriding class methods. So I wanted to quickly go over Stepping Stone Lab 6. So for Stepping Stone Lab 6, you'll be working with the recipe driver application, recipe box driver application. So you'll be giving a template for Stepping Stone 6 recipe box. In this class, you'll be completing these variables and methods. So you want to first have an instance variable, which is the list of recipes, which is going to be an array list of recipe objects. So this is only one variable that you'll have for this class, recipe box class. Because there's only one variable, you only have one getter and setter method, and this will be a getter method which gets the array list of recipe objects, and then a setter method which will set the array list of recipe objects. So this will set the instance variable, and the getter will get the instance variable and return that instance variable, the array list of recipe objects. You'll have two constructors, one constructor that has no arguments, another constructor which takes in the array list of recipes as an argument and will assign that array list to the instance variable list of recipes when the recipe box object is created. And then you'll have these three custom methods which you'll create: print all recipe details, print all recipe names, and add new recipe. So the print all recipe details will actually print all the recipe details. So all the instance variables of the recipe, such as the name, the servings, and all the ingredients. So you want to take advantage of the print ingredients method that exists within the ingredient class when printing all the recipe details. So you want to print the recipe variables, again, like the name, the servings, serving size, all of the ingredients, etc. And then you'll have a print all recipe names. So this will print all of just the names of the recipes within the list of recipes. And then you're going to have add new recipe. So the add new recipe, you should take advantage of the create new recipe method that you created in the previous Stepping Stone lab. This is going to be we're basically going to make a call to the recipe method, create new recipe. So this add new recipe will basically prompt the user to enter all of the attributes of the recipe, all the ingredients, serving size, the name, etc., and will then create a new instance of the recipe, a new object, and add that new recipe object to the list of recipes. So that's what the add new recipe method is doing. So for this lab, you'll be working on this. This will be, again, the driver class for the final project. So a note down here, these are the things you'll be working on. So again, you'll be creating the instance variable, so the single list variable and list of recipes. You'll be working on the accessor and mutator methods for this variable, the constructors, and these three custom methods. So let's actually look at the template and go through that. So here's the template for the Stepping Stone Lab 6. So notice I imported it already into Java project. I renamed it so that there's no spaces and it matches the name of the class. Okay, so a few things. So you'll notice that it has a commented code that explains what to do. So you want to make sure you follow all the instructions within these commented code blocks, or commented blocks. So you want to first, again, declare the instance variable, the array list of Stepping Stone by recipe objects. You want to have an accessor and mutator method for this. The constructors, so the two different constructors. So make sure you have one that does not take in any arguments, and another one that does take in an array list of recipe objects, and sets the list of recipes variable of this class to that array list that's passed in. And then you want to implement all of these different custom methods. So these 3 different methods, make sure you implement those as well. And again, you can make calls to the other classes, right? The recipe class, for example, when you're printing all the recipe details, you can make a call to the recipe print recipe method, which will then, inside of that method, can make a call to the print ingredient method, so of the ingredient class. So again, you can don't reinvent the wheel. You know, you want to take advantage and reuse code where you can. You want to call methods in other classes that actually do some of this functionality for you already. And then you want to have this method add recipe. So again, we mentioned that as well. The add recipe should call the create new recipe method, or here they set add recipe. This is the same as the create new recipe method of your recipe class. So you can make a call to that, which will prompt the user for all of the attributes of the recipe and all the ingredients, etc. So you worked on this in a previous Stepping Stone lab. And then you're printing all recipe names. So this is simply just iterating through each recipe in the list of recipe array list and printing out just the recipe name. So then you have the menu method. So menu method is the driver of this final project. So this is where you will display the menu to the user, and the user will make a selection where they want to add a recipe, print the recipe details, or print the recipe names. They'll make a selection, and you should execute code depending on the selection that they make. Okay, so there's 2 options here. You can have an additional Stepping Stone 6 recipe box tester class where you will make a call to this menu method. So you'll have to create an instance of the recipe box class, right, the recipe box object, and then make a call to this menu method. So within this Stepping Stone 6 recipe box tester class. So you'll have a main method inside this class, which will actually execute, which will make a call to this menu method and execute the code within this menu method. Or you can actually change the name of this method to be the main method of the recipe box class and have the code run directly from the recipe box class. So you can change this to the main method. However, if you do that, just be sure that you uncomment or comment the appropriate code. So notice right now it's set up in a way where it's expecting you to have an additional Stepping Stone 6 recipe box tester class, and inside this main method you're making a call to this menu method. So that's how it's set up now. But if you decide to make this the main method of the recipe box class and just have everything run in this main method, then that is okay. Just make sure that you comment out this code and then uncomment this code down here. So it's just depending on how you want to do it. Either way is fine. The point is you want to test the methods of this class. So whether you test it within the main method of the class or in a separate class, that's up to you. So notice here that there are a few errors. So this new recipe, this is actually the add recipe. So this is the same thing as here. So you want to make sure that you make a change to this method call, just to make sure it is add recipe. These are throwing errors because we have not created yet the print all recipe details method, which you will create. And again, and notice that it takes in an input. The print all recipe details method takes in an actual recipe. So it takes in a recipe object and then will display the properties of that recipe. And again, you can call the print recipe method of the recipe class to actually print those recipe attributes. So that is everything with the Stepping Stone Lab 6. Just be sure all of your code runs correctly, and when you submit, just make sure you submit all of the classes that are needed for your code to execute correctly. And as usual, please reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.